the expression that someone is a naysayer? Have you ever been in like a meeting at work, or have that guy at work that you work with or something, who's always kind of like, he's just a naysayer, you know, like the group wants to do something, they have a great idea, and there's that one person, right, who's got to kind of like rain on everyone's parade, got to be negative, has to see all of the kind of bad qualities, right? Well, the Pharisees are like that in this story. They're kind of the naysayers. And they do this a lot, right? So Jesus just heals a man who's dumb and speaks, and they cast out a demon, right? And what do they say? Oh, well, he does it by the prince of demons, right? You know, it's like some kind of like, kind of someone who's like a sore loser, right? Or they see someone who they're a little jealous of, you know, and they got to make some type of an excuse of like, well, it's not from God, you know. They got to come up, they got to find something negative, something to tear down, some kind of bad quality to fixate on. That's a problem we all struggle with, some people more than others. And whether it's a workplace, or someone in a family, or a community like this, that kind of an attitude and that kind of a person is toxic to a community. And we all have to be on guard for that, both in ourselves to make sure we don't become people like that, and to watch out for people who spread that kind of a sickness around to others. Because that's what it is. That kind of it springs from a certain attitude, and that attitude is contagious. It's an attitude that sees the bad and ignores the good, that fixates on the things that are wrong, that fixates on all the things that they don't like, and then grumbles and complains about it, and doesn't actually do anything to solve the problem, right? But just likes to complain. You know, there's a study that showed that 70% of all workplace conversations are complaining. You know, this is probably, when I talk to people, and I meet people who used to be Orthodox, who aren't in the church anymore, or even people who are just of some Christian variety and aren't Christian. Do you know usually why they're not? Because of the way people in the church use this. The way they talk. Not just any kind of talk. I mean, it's this, the complaining, the gossiping, the grumbling, and the negative talk. That, more than anything else, has resulted in the church almost slitting its own wrist in losing people. Because we have a bad habit, and we don't know how to tame our tongue. If you find yourself a person who complains and gripes and whines every time something isn't kind of exactly what you like, you know, Lenny, he did this new song, and I just don't like it, so at coffee hour, I'm going to go and I'm going to grumble about it to someone else. I won't go talk to Lenny about it, you know, because that would take too much courage, right? I'll just grumble about it, right? Or someone wore something to church and it's so silly. Or oh, look, so-and-so's in church finally, right? Or something like that. But we do it in our families too, don't we? We do it behind each other's backs, right? We don't actually confront anything. And hidden in the kind of grumbling that we see among the Pharisees is a cowardice and a sloth. That is, most complaining doesn't actually seek to solve problems. Because solving problems will require that you have to do some work behind it. You just like to complain, and you're not interested in changing the situation. As opposed to talking to somebody in some constructive way, right? With the intent of making something better. And if you don't agree with someone, but you approach it with a humility, understanding that your opinion and your perspective is not the center of the universe. So I think this is a great challenge that we have before us, and I think that this particular gospel message points out. Is it reminds us about the Christian discipline of taming our tongues, of being in control of that. And you know, the scriptures have so much to say about that. If you read through the Psalms or Proverbs, it's replete with so many examples of this difficulty of controlling the tongue. The other thing that's dangerous about this is that you become the way that you talk, right? If you get in that bad habit, you know, you ever get in a rut before, or you just kind of, whether it's thinking, you know, a certain way or talking a certain way, it gets hard to get out of that. You know, if you talk a certain way long enough, you know what, that starts to be implanted into your character. And then, if you do that long enough for a lifetime, that becomes who you are. You know, I mean, who wants to be remembered, right, as the person who griped, right? The person who said nasty things, you know, who was real nice to everyone's face or something like that, but then, you know, people look and go, I gotta whine about it, you know, like, oh, Jesus, that was a great miracle. And then you go back to your Pharisee friends, you just did it by the prince of demons, you know, or something like that, right? It's that kind of garbage. We have to be careful because these things can really shape who we are. We have to be careful of other people who are like that, because that can infect us. You know, you hang around a certain type of person and you start to develop their habits and their manners and talking to them. So if you're at work, or you're among a group of friends, or you're here at church, and you encounter someone who's talking like the Pharisees were in today's gospel, you need to, here's what you can do. You can excuse yourself from the company, from the conversation. You can try to change the topic to something that's actually beneficial and building up, right? Or you can just say, you know what, that's a bit negative, let's talk about something else, you know? Or if someone's really complaining about someone else, you know, maybe you can be like, why don't you go talk to that person if it's bothering you so much, you know? So often conflicts arise, whether it's marriages or communities or families, because people end up being really passive-aggressive. They don't actually deal with things front on, so what they do is they let things stew underneath, right? And they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they don't have that courage to be assertive, right? To come out and say something, and you know, clearly, plainly, and calmly from the beginning, and honestly. And so what happens? What happens? It like swells like some sort of abscess, right? And then, when some circumstance happens and the conversation is forced, what happens? People say really crazy and stupid things to each other, and they blow up, right? The situation blows up. And you have some great argument and fight, and if someone's sensitive, then you get someone who's really hurt. You know? In the context of a church, this leads to people leaving. In the context of families, it's people not talking to each other anymore. I mean, how many of us have someone somewhere in our family who is like ostracized, who we don't talk to, or they don't talk to us, or they're somehow like a brother or sister or whatever, and maybe we just don't connect with them anymore, or a child? You know, the longer I've been a priest, longer I realize how much this happens in families. And part of it is not being able to control our tongues. So here's a little principle for you if you're trying to discern how you're using your language and how you're using your mouth and whether or not you should say something or not. First, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Before you open your mouth, ask that. Is this true? And this is important because oftentimes we just kind of assume things are true, or we just jump on a bandwagon when we hear something. We don't actually like really put any work into finding out if something is true, right? Or we exaggerate someone or something or situation, right? Exaggeration is a form of falsehood. So is it true? Secondly, is it kind, right? Like, is this coming from a position of kindness in our heart? Or are we motivated by some desire to either show off, or belittle, or make ourselves feel bigger, or get revenge and hurt someone just a little bit, or control, manipulate someone in some way? Is it kind? Is what we're saying coming from a kindness of our heart? And will that person receive it as a kindness? And lastly, is it necessary? And that's to say, does it do any good? Right? And that should be a great question. It's like, is what I'm saying now doing any good for anybody? Is anyone being inspired? Is anyone being encouraged? Is anyone being helped given advice in any way? Is this working to solve any problems that people have? Is this increasing people's love and trust between each other? If it's not, don't say it. It's not necessary. So be careful of people like the Pharisees who like to grumble and whine and complain. As a church, as a religious community, we are particularly susceptible to that. If you want to know what the sins of churches are, like little local church communities like ours or any of them across this country, go read the Gospels and watch how the Pharisees behave. Because those are the pitfalls and the mistakes that churches make. The Pharisees are very much a mirror image of how many of us as religious people act. We have to be on guard for it. And one of them is this grumbling, complaining, negative talk that does not come from a good place and does not help other people excel in virtue and in living a good and godly life. Glory to Jesus Christ.